The abandoned hospital stood on the outskirts of town, its windows broken, its halls left to rot. Locals warned of screams that echoed through its walls at night, but a group of friends entered anyway, eager for adventure. Flashlights in hand, they explored its endless corridors, laughing at first, until the laughter turned to silence. By morning, only one of them stumbled out alive, shaken, broken, and unable to explain what had happened inside. The hospital had been empty for nearly 3 decades. Its white walls, once sterile, were now stained with mildew, and its windows were shattered by years of storms and vandals. The townspeople avoided it, crossing the street rather than walking near its gates. They whispered that the screams of long-dead patients could still be heard echoing down its dark corridors. But for 5 friends, Ethan, Chloe, Ryan, Mia, and Tyler, the hospital was a challenge, not a warning. They were thrill-seekers, always chasing the next adventure, and the old Briarwood Hospital promised the ultimate dare. On a cool autumn evening, they stood at the front steps, flashlights in hand, their laughter masking the tension in their voices. "This place looks like a horror movie set," Ryan joked, kicking at the broken doors. Mia shivered. "That's the point, isn't it?" Ethan, the self-appointed leader, pushed the door open. It groaned on its hinges, revealing a cavernous lobby littered with debris. "All right, let's see what all the stories are about." Inside, the air was heavy with dust and the faint scent of rot. Their flashlights cut through the darkness, illuminating peeling paint, overturned wheelchairs, and rusted gurneys. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of glass beneath their boots. They wandered deeper, their laughter growing quieter with each hallway. Chloe stopped at a door marked surgery. She pushed it open, revealing a room filled with rusted instruments scattered across the floor. "Creepy," she muttered, shining her light on an operating table bolted to the center. Tyler leaned against the doorframe, smirking. "Imagine being strapped down in here." "Not helping," Mia muttered, clutching her flashlight tighter. As they explored, the building seemed to close in on them. The corridors twisted and branched endlessly, every corner leading to another hall, another room, another shadow. Ethan kept track with chalk marks on the walls, but the further they went, the more disoriented they became. At one point, Ryan swore he heard something, a faint shuffle behind them. He spun, flashlight darting across the empty hall. "Did you hear that?" "No one's here but us," Ethan said quickly, though his voice lacked conviction. But the sound returned, footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing through the silence. The group froze, their flashlights searching desperately. The hall was empty. Still, the steps continued, as if someone or something walked just out of sight. "Probably the building settling," Tyler said, though his hands shook. They pressed on, but unease gnawed at them. In one ward, Chloe found a row of children's beds, tiny and rusted, lined neatly against the wall. A few still held dolls, their faces cracked and eyeless. She shivered, whispering, "Why would they just leave everything behind?" No one answered. As the night deepened, the atmosphere grew heavier. The air was colder, their breaths visible in the beams of their flashlights. Strange sounds echoed through the halls, distant banging, whispers that carried without source. At one point, Mia screamed, pointing her light toward a window. For a split second, she swore she saw a face staring in from the outside, pale, expressionless. When the others rushed to look, the window was empty. "Okay, this is officially not fun anymore," Chloe said, her voice shaking, but Ethan pressed them onward, insisting they reach the top floor. "We came here to prove this place is just an old building," he said. "We're not leaving until we do." None of them noticed the faint writing scrawled on the wall behind them, revealed only when the last flashlight passed by. In jagged letters it read, "You will not all leave." The group reached the stairwell, its metal steps groaning beneath their weight as they climbed. Dust rained from the ceiling with every movement, and the air grew colder as they ascended. Their flashlights revealed graffiti scrawled across the walls, names, dates, and warnings. One phrase appeared again and again. "Don't look at them." Chloe frowned, running her fingers over the letters. "What does that mean?" "No clue," Ethan muttered. He pressed onward, but even he couldn't hide the unease in his voice. The second floor was worse. Hallways stretched endlessly, lined with rooms that seemed too identical. Some doors hung open, others were locked or jammed. Each room looked the same. Rusted beds, overturned cabinets, peeling paint. Yet it felt like eyes followed them everywhere. Ryan kicked at an old IV stand, the clang echoing too loudly. This place is a maze. How did anyone work here? Mia hugged her arms around herself. We should go back. We've seen enough. Ethan shook his head. We're fine. We stick together. And a sound cut him off. It came from the far end of the hall, a soft rhythmic tapping, like fingernails against metal. Tap, 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 tap. Everyone froze. Chloe whispered, "What is that?" The tapping grew louder, closer, echoing against the walls. Ethan raised his flashlight, its beam trembling as he aimed it down the hall. Nothing, only shadows. Then Mia gasped. Look, a figure stood at the far end, half hidden by the dark, thin, still, its head tilted unnaturally to one side. Ryan's voice cracked. Is that a person? The figure didn't move. The tapping stopped. Tyler stepped forward cautiously, though his legs shook. Hey, who's there? The figure shifted slightly, and for a split second, the beam caught its face, or what should have been a face. Instead, there was only pale, smooth skin. No eyes, no mouth, nothing. Chloe screamed, stumbling backward. The figure dissolved into the shadows. Panic erupted. Ethan shouted, "Stay together," but their voices overlapped with rising fear. They hurried through another hallway, flashlights darting wildly. Every corner seemed to stretch longer. Every door led only to more darkness. Mia grabbed Ethan's arm. "We're lost." No, just keep moving," he insisted, though sweat beaded on his forehead. Then Ryan's flashlight caught something on the wall, writing, fresh, jagged letters carved into the plaster. "Don't look at them." Chloe's voice broke. "Them. Not it. Them." As if on cue, footsteps erupted all around them, dozens of them, heavy, dragging, circling. The group huddled together, backs to one another, flashlights shaking. Shapes flickered at the edges of the beams. Too many to count. Tall, thin figures, their smooth faces reflecting pale light. They didn't step fully into view. They lingered just out of sight, surrounding them. Mia sobbed. "We have to get out." Ethan swallowed hard, his voice barely steady. "The stairwell. We just need to find the stairwell." They moved quickly, nearly running, their lights catching glimpses of the faceless figures at every turn. Each time they blinked, the figures were closer, their heads tilting unnaturally, their limbs jerking with puppet-like movements. Finally, they burst into a wide ward. Rows of beds stood like silent witnesses, sheets yellowed and rotting. For a moment, the room seemed empty. Then, slowly, the door slammed shut behind them. The whispering began. Not voices, not words, just the sound of breath, deep and steady, filling the ward. Ryan spun, flashlight trembling. "They're in here." Chloe gripped his hand, tears streaming down her face. "I don't want to die here." The light flickered, and in that instant, dozens of faceless heads turned toward them from the shadows. The ward was suffocating with silence, broken only by the rasping sound of breath that didn't belong to any of them. The beam of Ryan's flashlight trembled across the beds, catching glimpses of movement, shadows that seemed to twitch when the light passed. Mia clutched Chloe's arm. "Don't look at them," she whispered, repeating the warning carved into the walls. But it was too late. The figures moved. They emerged from the corners, tall and thin, their skin ghostly pale. Where faces should have been, there was only smooth emptiness. Dozens of them surrounded the group, swaying slightly, as though pulled by an invisible current. Chloe screamed, the sound shattering the silence. The creatures twitched violently at the noise, their heads snapping toward her in unison. The breath-like whispering grew louder, faster, until it filled every corner of the ward. "Run!" Ethan shouted. He grabbed Chloe's hand and dragged her toward the opposite door. The others followed, stumbling over rusted bed frames and broken tiles. The faceless figures lurched forward, moving with jerks and spasms, their limbs bending at wrong angles as they closed in. Tyler shoved a bed frame aside, clearing the path. They barreled through the door and into another hallway, slamming it shut behind them. The metal rattled under the force of dozens of fists pounding from the other side. "Keep moving!" Ethan yelled, his voice hoarse. They sprinted down the corridor, flashlights bouncing wildly. Every hallway looked the same, every corner identical. Panic gnawed at them, twisting their sense of direction. At last, they burst into a stairwell. Relief flickered, until they noticed the stairs that had once led down were blocked, collapsed into a pile of rubble. Only the steps upward remained. "No," Chloe sobbed. "We need to get out, not higher." "It doesn't matter." Ethan snapped. Up is the only way. They climbed, boots slamming against metal, the pounding from below fading but not disappearing. Their breaths came in ragged gasps, hearts racing. The third floor was worse. The hallway stretched impossibly long, lined with rusted doors, each one slightly open. The air reeked of mold and something sour, like rotting flesh. Mia gagged, covering her nose. "What is that smell?" No one answered. They passed door after door, their flashlights darting into the gaps. Inside, the rooms looked identical. Beds, restraints, old equipment, but in every room, something shifted just beyond the light. Pale limbs twitching, faceless heads turning. Chloe stopped suddenly, her beam catching words scrawled across a door in fresh, dark strokes. "Don't look." Her chest tightened. "We're not supposed to see them, that's why." Before she could finish, the door burst open. A figure lunged out, tall and rigid, its smooth head twisting unnaturally as it grabbed for her. Chloe shrieked, stumbling back. Ethan yanked her away, slamming the door shut on its grasping arm. The limb bent backward at an impossible angle, but the figure didn't make a sound. It simply withdrew, vanishing into the shadows. They ran again, desperation driving them forward. Finally, they found a large double door at the end of the hall. Ethan shoved it open, and they spilled into what had once been the hospital's operating theatre. The room was massive, the ceiling domed, with a gallery of seats above where students once observed surgeries. Rusted instruments lay scattered across the floor. An operating table stood at the center, restraints still bolted to its sides. For a moment, the room was silent. Then, from the gallery above, dozens of faceless figures leaned forward, their glowing white eyes locking onto the group. The operating theatre swallowed them in silence. Dust swirled in the beam of their flashlights, drifting over the rusted instruments that littered the floor. But no one could look away from the gallery above. Dozens of faceless figures leaned over the railing, their smooth heads tilted at impossible angles, their bodies twitching in unison. They made no sound, yet the air vibrated with their presence. Chloe gripped Ethan's arm so tightly her nails dug into his skin. "They're watching us," she whispered. "Don't look," Mia begged, squeezing her eyes shut. "That's what the walls said. Don't look at them." But the command was impossible to follow. The figures loomed in every direction, filling the gallery seats like an audience, their hollow eyes reflecting the faint light. Ryan's flashlight trembled as he swept it across the seats. "Why are they just standing there?" he asked, voice cracking. "They're waiting," Ethan said grimly. "For what?" Tyler demanded. The answer came not in words but in movement. Slowly, the faceless figures raised their arms, pointing down toward the operating table in the center of the room. Mia gasped. "No." The restraints glinted faintly in the flashlight beams. Rusted buckles, leather straps stiff with age, all ready to bind someone in place. Chloe backed away, shaking her head violently. "No, no, no. They want one of us on that table." The whispering began again. Low, layered, overlapping. This time the words were clear. "One stays." The friends stumbled back toward the door, but it slammed shut with a thunderous crack, locking them inside. The gallery trembled as the faceless figures leaned closer, their arms still pointing, their chant growing louder. "One stays. One stays." Ryan bolted toward a side door near the surgical equipment, but it wouldn't open. He pounded on it desperately. There has to be another way out. Ethan's flashlight caught movement by the table. For a brief moment, he saw a shape strapped there, not rusted bones or old restraints, but something fresher, a body, its skin pale, its chest unmoving. Mia's scream tore through the room. "It's Jason." They froze. The figure on the table twitched once, then dissolved into dust, leaving only the empty straps behind. The faceless crowd erupted in movement. Their heads snapped back in unison, their mouths opening though they had no features, releasing a chorus of whispers that shook the walls. Chloe dropped to her knees, sobbing. "We're never getting out." Ethan pulled her up, shouting over the din. "Don't give up. There has to be a way." Tyler grabbed a rusted scalpel from the floor, brandishing it like a weapon. "If they want one of us, they're going to have to fight for it." But the figures didn't attack. Instead, they raised their arms higher, their chant reaching a fever pitch. "One stays. One stays." The operating lights above flickered to life for the first time in decades, flooding the room in a harsh, sterile glow. The table gleamed under the brightness, waiting. The friends clung together, hearts racing, breath ragged. They knew the truth now. The hospital had rules, and one of them would not be leaving. The harsh surgical lights burned overhead, casting long shadows across the operating theatre. Dust particles shimmered in the glow, but the air felt heavy, suffocating. The group stood frozen, eyes darting between the empty table and the faceless audience above. The figures leaned closer, twitching, their whispering chant shaking the walls. One stays, one stays. Tyler gripped the rusted scalpel so tightly his knuckles turned white. "They're not taking me," he muttered, voice trembling with rage and fear. "Stop," Mia begged, tears streaking her face. "Don't fight them. Don't give them a reason. They've already chosen," Chloe sobbed, pointing at the table. "We can't all leave. That's what they want." Ethan shook his head violently. "No, we'll find another way. There has to be a way out." He scanned the walls, desperate for an exit, but every door was sealed shut, as if the building itself conspired against them. Then, without warning, the restraints on the table snapped open, leather straps curling as though inviting a body to lie down. The metallic sound echoed like a scream in the silence. Mia clamped her hands over her ears. I can't do this." The chant grew louder, more urgent. The faceless crowd shifted, their heads snapping in unison, pointing toward the group. Ethan stepped in front of the others, his voice raw. "If you want someone, take me. Just let the others go." But the figures did not answer. Their whispers swelled, shaking the gallery seats until bolts rained from above. The air grew colder, their presence pressing down like a weight on the chest. Ryan suddenly bolted toward the doors, pounding on them with both fists. "Let us out, please. We'll do anything." His flashlight fell to the floor, clattering against rusted instruments. The doors didn't budge. Tyler's breathing grew ragged. His eyes darted between the table and his friends. Maybe if one of us lies down, it'll stop." "No," Ethan shouted. "That's what they want us to think. They'll kill whoever does it." But Chloe whispered, "What if it's the only way to save the rest of us?" The lights above flickered violently, plunging the room into bursts of shadow and brightness. With every flicker, the figures above seemed closer, their faceless heads hanging over the railing, their hands stretching downward. Suddenly, Ryan was yanked backward. He screamed as invisible hands dragged him toward the table. His heels scraped against the tile, his fingers clawing at the floor. "Help me!" Ethan and Tyler lunged, grabbing his arms, pulling with all their strength. For a moment it was a tug-of-war between the living and the unseen. The whispers rose to a deafening pitch, the crowd thrashing above like a storm of shadows. With one last desperate pull, Ryan broke free. He collapsed against Ethan, sobbing, his chest heaving. But the victory was short-lived. The table buckled and groaned, and new words carved themselves into the rusted metal surface, glowing faintly in the harsh light. "One will stay. One will bleed." Mia's scream echoed through the room. The scalpel slipped from Tyler's trembling hand and clattered to the floor. The friends huddled together, the faceless audience looming above, their chant now relentless, unending. "One stays, one bleeds, one stays, one bleeds." The hospital had made its demand clear. The chant thundered in their ears. "One stays, one bleeds," echoing from every corner of the operating theatre. The friends clutched each other, their breaths shallow, as the surgical lights flickered overhead. Ryan wiped his face with shaking hands. "It wants one of us," he whispered. "It's not going to stop until it gets it." "Then it can take me," Ethan said suddenly, his voice hoarse but steady. "If that's what it takes for the rest of you to get out." "No." Chloe's scream tore through the room. "Don't you dare, we'll find another way." But even as she spoke, the restraints on the table snapped open wider, curling outward like skeletal fingers beckoning their victim. The steel frame groaned under some invisible weight. Tyler's voice broke. "What if it doesn't stop at one? What if it wants all of us?" The words made the air heavier. For the first time, even Ethan faltered. Suddenly the gallery above erupted in motion. The faceless figures leaned farther, twitching violently, their glowing eyes fixed on the group, and in a single synchronized movement they raised their arms again, this time pointing directly at Mia. Her knees buckled. "No, please, no." Tears streaked her cheeks. Chloe wrapped her arms around her, shaking her head. "They can't just choose like that. We won't let them." But the chanting grew louder, the words hammering into their skulls. One stays, one bleeds. Mia's sobs filled the room. I don't want to die. Ethan gritted his teeth, fury surging through him. He grabbed a rusted tray of instruments and hurled it at the gallery. The metal clattered against the seats, scattering scalpels and forceps, but the faceless audience didn't flinch. They only tilted their heads, watching silently, the whispers deepening. The operating lights above flared, blinding them. When their vision cleared, fresh writing had appeared on the walls in jagged, bloody strokes. She stays, Mia screamed, collapsing against Chloe. Tyler pressed his fists against his temples, muttering, "It's not real, it's not real." But then the table moved. It scraped violently across the tile, screeching as it slid closer to the group. The straps writhed like living things, snapping open and shut. Invisible hands yanked at Mia's arms. She shrieked, thrashing wildly as she was dragged toward the table. "Help me, please!" Chloe and Ethan lunged, gripping her with all their strength. Tyler grabbed her legs, pulling against the unseen force. Ryan scrambled for the scalpel on the floor, brandishing it at the empty air. The struggle tore through the room, screams and whispers blending into chaos. Mia's fingernails dug into Chloe's skin, leaving bloody crescents. "Don't let them take me." For a moment, it seemed they might win. The invisible force weakened, the straps snapping in frustration. But then the faceless crowd let out a sound, a long guttural hiss that shook the room. The strength of the pull doubled. With a final violent tug, Mia was ripped from their grasp and slammed onto the table. The straps locked around her wrists and ankles before anyone could react. "No!" Chloe screamed, pounding against the restraints. Ethan slashed at the leather with the scalpel, but the material was unyielding, as if forged from something far stronger than hide. The lights above focused into a blinding cone over Mia's body. The crowd's chant shifted, deep and slow. "One bleeds, one bleeds." Mia's wide, terrified eyes darted between her friends. "Don't let it happen. Please, don't let them." Her words were drowned out by the roar of the faceless figures as the operating tools scattered across the floor began to move on their own, rising slowly into the air. The hospital had chosen. The instruments hovered above Mia, trembling as if pulled by unseen strings. Rusted scalpels, clamps and bone saws rotated slowly in the harsh light, their shadows stretching long across the tile. The faceless audience leaned forward as one, their glowing eyes fixed on the table. Mia thrashed against the restraints, her screams echoing in the domed room. "Please, don't let them do this." Ethan slashed wildly at the floating tools, his scalpel clanging uselessly against them. "We have to get her out." Chloe sobbed, pulling at the straps until her hands bled. "They're too tight." Ryan backed away, his face pale, sweat pouring down his forehead. "It wants her. It's not going to stop." "Shut up!" Ethan roared. "We're not leaving her." But even as he shouted, one of the scalpels darted downward, slicing across Mia's arm. Blood blossomed instantly, staining the straps dark. Her scream ripped through the theater, raw and guttural. The chant from above grew louder. "One bleeds, one bleeds." Tyler grabbed a rusted chair and hurled it at the gallery. It crashed into the railing, but the faceless figures didn't move. They only swayed, whispering in unison, their voices pressing against the friends like a physical force. Another tool descended, grazing Mia's side. She convulsed, sobbing, "Please, please, make it stop." Ethan dropped the scalpel, climbing onto the table. "Hold on," he shouted. He tried to shield her with his body, but the restraints snapped violently, hurling him backward. He hit the floor hard, the wind knocked from his lungs. Chloe scrambled to his side. "Ethan, we can't fight them, we can't." The instruments whirled faster now, circling above Mia like vultures. One by one they struck, shallow cuts at first, then deeper, as though savoring the ritual. Her cries grew weaker, her voice breaking into hoarse gasps. Ryan pressed himself into a corner, hands over his ears, muttering, "It's not real, it's not real." But his eyes never left the table. Mia turned her head toward Chloe, blood streaking her face. Her lips trembled. "Don't let me die here." Chloe screamed, throwing herself onto the table, trying to block the blades. Ethan pulled her back just in time as a bone saw slashed through the air where her head had been moments before. The faceless crowd erupted into a unified roar, their whispers transforming into something primal, monstrous. The walls shook, dust cascading from the ceiling. Then, as suddenly as it began, the instruments froze mid-air. For a long moment, they hovered, dripping with blood. The restraints unlocked with a metallic snap, and Mia's limp body slid from the table, crumpling to the floor. Silence. The crowd leaned back into the shadows, their glowing eyes dimming slightly. The chant faded, replaced by a single guttural phrase that echoed through the chamber. One stayed. Chloe crawled to Mia's side, cradling her in trembling arms. Tears streamed down her face as she pressed her forehead to her friend's. "No, please, no, wake up." But Mia's chest no longer rose. Ethan staggered to his feet, his face ashen. "We have to get out, now." Ryan nodded numbly, while Tyler stood frozen, staring at the table as if in a trance. The operating lights flickered once, then went dark. The instruments clattered to the floor. The room was plunged into shadow, broken only by the weak beams of their flashlights. The friends turned toward the door. This time, it stood open. The open doorway gaped like a wound in the wall, its frame splintered and blackened. Beyond it stretched a hallway bathed in shadow, the air colder than before. The three survivors, Ethan, Chloe and Ryan, stared at it in silence, their bodies trembling, their minds numb from what they had just witnessed. Chloe refused to let go of Mia's body. She clutched her friend's hand, rocking back and forth. "I'm not leaving her. I can't leave her." Ethan knelt beside her, voice breaking. "Chloe, she's gone. If we stay here, we'll die too." "No," Chloe screamed, pulling away from him. "She was my best friend. I'm not abandoning her." Ryan stood in the corner, eyes glassy, muttering the same phrase over and over. "One stayed, one stayed, one stayed." His voice grew quieter each time, as if he were fading. The whispers returned, slipping through the cracks in the walls. The words overlapped with Ryan's, sinking until they were indistinguishable. Ethan grabbed his arm, shaking him. "Ryan, snap out of it." But Ryan only stared past him, his pupils shrinking, his mouth moving with the whispers. Slowly he turned toward the table, his steps mechanical, as though the hospital itself pulled him back. "Ryan, no!" Ethan shouted, lunging to block him, but Ryan shoved him aside with inhuman strength, climbing onto the table. The restraints snapped shut instantly, locking him in place. Chloe shrieked, covering her mouth. "No, no, no!" The instruments on the floor began to rattle, rising once more into the air. Ryan's head tilted back, his mouth opening in a silent scream as the chant thundered from above. "One bleeds, one stays." Ethan grabbed Chloe, dragging her toward the open door. "We can't save him. We have to go." She fought against him, sobbing, but the roar of whispers swallowed her cries. The last glimpse they had of Ryan was his body thrashing against the straps as the instruments descended, the faceless audience leaning closer in hungry silence. They stumbled into the hallway, slamming the door shut behind them. The whispers muffled but did not fade. The corridor twisted endlessly, their flashlights barely cutting through the dark. Every door they passed rattled violently, as if something inside clawed to get out. Fresh writing appeared on the walls as they moved, letters gouged into plaster. 2 remain. Chloe clung to Ethan, her body shaking uncontrollably. "We're next. One of us is next." "Not if we keep moving," Ethan said, though his voice lacked conviction. They ran blindly through corridor after corridor, the hospital rearranging itself around them. Sometimes they found themselves in wards they had already passed, other times in rooms that shouldn't exist. Endless operating theaters, child-sized beds lined with faceless dolls, stairwells that led nowhere. At last, they stumbled into the main lobby. The shattered windows glimmered faintly in their beams. The front doors stood ajar, open to the night. Hope surged in Ethan's chest. "We made it!" He dragged Chloe toward the doors, but just before they reached them, Chloe stopped. Her grip tightened on his hand, her eyes widened, her lips trembling. "Ethan," she whispered, pointing to the glass. Their reflections stared back, but they weren't their own. Their faces were smooth, featureless, glowing faintly in the moonlight. Ethan froze, horror flooding him. The glass trembled under unseen hands pressing against it from the outside. And then, softly, the chant returned, this time from the darkness beyond the doors. "One stays, one stays." Briarwood Hospital still rots on the edge of town, its halls silent, its windows broken. Locals whisper that if you step inside after midnight, you'll hear the chant echoing through the wards, "One stays." Of the 5 friends who entered, only Chloe stumbled out at dawn, shaken hollow, unable to speak of what she saw. Ethan, Ryan, Mia, and Tyler were never found, And some say the hospital still waits, hungry for its next patient.